Hello and welcome to this Workforce Committee Quick Take. My name is Scott Moore and I'm joined today by Ben Wasmund from Lakes Region EMS. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Good, Scott. How are you?
Good, good. So about a year and a half ago, President Reiner, or then President Reiner, had established the Workforce Committee and named Ben as the committee chair. Workforce Committee was sort of formed in response to a lot of feedback from our members about the challenges with recruitment and retention. And so President Reiner created this committee to study some of those issues, and it has quickly become obvious based upon either the work that committee's done or the questions that I receive as the AAA's HR and operations consultant, that we had work beyond just workforce recruitment and retention. So today's topic, just for this quick take, is going to be legalized, or the changing really impact of marijuana in the workplace. So as many of you know, there has been what we really call sort of that green wave of a changing public and legal opinion on marijuana. 25 years ago, and for a very long time, the opinion on marijuana was that it was an illegal drug, and that, certainly it should not, was sort of put in the same category as some of the other illegal drugs, different, interestingly, than alcohol. However, we've seen a pretty dramatic change in the public opinion and the legal status of marijuana around the country. This map here shows that many states have passed, I think it's almost 43 states now have passed either some decriminalization and or full out recreational or medical legalization of marijuana. So Ben, of course, is in the state of Minnesota and operates or has operations in the state of Wisconsin. And so Ben, how has this issue impacted Lakes Region?
Yeah, just as you said, as we're going through our policies and doing regular updates on them, and knowing that this is an evolving challenge in the sense it's a moving target, and it will continue to change as other states probably will change kind of their opinion on marijuana. So we're currently now in a spot where operations in Minnesota and operations in Wisconsin is completely illegal, whereas Minnesota is not only legal for medicinal use, but also decriminalized. So it's one of those questions that we see as really becoming an issue of how do we write a policy, update a policy that has two completely different kind of variations based on where we operate. And just our connection to this and kind of workforce is, a big thing with workforce is not just the recruitment, but it's the retention. So if we have a poor policy on this, or if we're acting inappropriately as this starts to become an issue, then are we losing employees because we either don't understand kind of what our rights are, we don't understand the levels of legal sides of what's legal, not legal, when can you do it, when can't you do it, what happens with CBD oil. So all of these things are coming up, which is why I wanted to spend some time just talking to you through some of these different scenarios.
Yeah, and I think as in preparing for this, one of the discussions, we've seen laws, the state of New York, state of New Jersey, California have passed laws that are now saying, in this state, it is actually illegal for employers to take a negative employment action based upon a positive marijuana test. So in other words, somebody who is legally using marijuana off duty, and in these states, there is a pretty strict or there is an interest in restricting the degree to which an employer can control employees' off-duty conduct. So, yeah, as I said, what we're running into, though, is a challenge because marijuana is still on the Controlled Substances Act list, and there's been a lot of movement to move it off of that list to essentially mainline that drug. And as we've seen, a dramatic change in opinion, right? 30 years ago, marijuana was associated with somebody sitting in his parents' basement with a blacklight poster, right? Smoking marijuana. Today, marijuana really does have, or has been shown, while the Controlled Substances Act says that there are no known medicinal qualities of marijuana, we just know that anecdotally the evidence really shows that, in fact, this really is benefiting and helping a lot of people. The challenge is, as EMS providers, many of us are either federal contractors or subcontractors or grantees, or the nature of the work that we do is safety sensitive. So, for example, bus drivers, people operating vehicles that have the ability to hurt other individuals, the work that our folks do of course, is incredibly important. You wouldn't want a surgeon or a nurse in the hospital under the influence of some drug at the time that they were taking care of you. So right now, under the Drug-Free Workplace Act, it says, if you are a federal contractor, subcontractor, or grantee, your organization must have a drug-free workplace. Now, in the old days, what we used to suggest was that just meant that people could not ever test positive for any drug. But what we're really learning now, as you dig into that law, and as these other states are passing laws relative to the off-duty use, is that, in fact, the law says that you can't be under the influence of drugs while working. It doesn't say, just like with alcohol, right? The pilots, for example, cannot consume alcohol within 8 hours of sitting in the cockpit. So what we're really going to get down to, I think, is some degree of a changing in the way that we assess marijuana. So one of the things that I used to hear early on was, geez, what do we do if an employee says they've been prescribed marijuana? And as we've talked about many times before, because marijuana is not regulated by the FDA, it can't be prescribed. A person would get qualified for it by their physician, for which then they would go to a dispensary to try and get their marijuana. Ben, you brought up a great point, though. What do you do in a situation where an employee, or what position do you take in your organization when it comes to employees and testing positive? And one of the things that we've said is making sure that you have a very, very clear policy regarding marijuana use and CBD oil, right? We've talked a lot about CBD and the use of CBD products. And one of the things that we know about CBD is it's been shown, or again, anecdotally, a lot of people say that they've gotten significant relief from, orthopedic or muscle type aches from the use of CBD oil. One of the things that the folks need to know is that CBD oil does contain, usually it's 0.3% or less of THC, which is that psychoactive chemical inside marijuana. Now, because CBD oil is not regulated by the FDA, of course, the labeling is not necessarily going to be accurate. So if you have an employee who's testing positive for marijuana, but is swearing to you that they've never used it, it is entirely possible that they're being honest and that, in fact, they're using CBD oil, that in fact, maybe it's either they didn't know that if it had greater than 0.3%, that it would be, it could show up positive on a test. But so it's just important that your policy is very, very clear. So I know, Ben, at Lakes Region, you guys have a very clear policy. Has that policy changed at all as Minnesota has changed the law relative to medicinal or decriminalized marijuana? Have you guys made any adjustments to that?
Yeah, and that's really what started this process. As you said, there's so many factors here that are being affected by these changes. Because first is just that initial drug screen. So initial drug screen previously might have marijuana in there. Now all of a sudden they get a not negative test result, but it's because of CBD oil. So we have to determine how do we factor that in now in a state that has said that it's legalized. The other part, as you mentioned, with CBD oil or even with marijuana, it's not regulated by the FDA, so there really is no true concentration. It's not to the point where you can say how much of each ingredient is in it. When people would take these supplements that had iron and all these other things, you don't really know how much iron is in it. We have an idea, but it can vary so much because of the lack of regulation. So that's a big challenge that we're faced with. The other big thing that has come up, which is kind of about the drug-free workplace, as you mentioned, drug-free workplace means not necessarily off duty, but when on duty, you can't be under the influence. So now we have this challenge with potentially THC or some level of intoxication due to marijuana use, but yet there's no way to test that. So that's the next piece to deal with now, is how do we now identify if we believe somebody to be under influence for cause, but yet now it could be THC versus alcohol. Where does the screening go? How do we become proficient in knowing what that is and what that isn't?
Yeah, and so it's funny, when in doing research for upcoming webinar I'm doing with Margaret Keaveney, a fellow EMS attorney, what we know about the way that marijuana is metabolized in the body is that if you are someone who once in a great while using marijuana, generally speaking, that'll be metabolized and disappear out of your system in about 3 days. If you're someone who is pretty habitually using marijuana, it's going to take weeks for that to clear out. So you could feasibly be in work, had been on vacation last week, had maybe, were using marijuana and then came back to work. You were perfectly sober, had an incident, got tested, and marijuana showed up in your system. So this is what we're really talking about, is being really diligent about educating your workforce, not only about the fact that they will test positive. So if you have someone come in and said, well, I was at a party 2 weeks ago and I took one hit off of a joint or something like that, they generally speaking wouldn't be testing positive in a typical urinalysis. However, just making sure that your folks know, one, that yes, using CBD oil could potentially result in a positive drug screen, pretty rare, but could happen. Number two, that we're going to be looking for impairment. So if you are in a situation where it is okay to drug test post-accident, that is perfectly fine. One of the things that I do always caution people about is don't just have a blanket policy about drug testing all individuals involved. So for example, if you had a motor vehicle crash, you wouldn't necessarily be testing the passenger in the motor vehicle crash, because that person would not likely, their impairment would not be the result or cause the accident. And that has been shown by OSHA to be potentially retaliatory. But what I would say is be sure that your folks know what's going to happen if I test positive. In the state of Wisconsin right now, you could in fact terminate an employee because of a positive drug test. The only caveat that I'll give to that is those people who have a medically protected, an ADA protected medical condition. So if you had someone who was operating a vehicle, certainly you are not required to necessarily, to accommodate that, because in that safety sensitive position, but they might use it off duty. Now your billing person who never, isn't in a safety sensitive position, that's an individual who likely in the state of Minnesota would be able to use marijuana. You still wouldn't want them in work under the influence of marijuana, but it really comes down to education, making sure that your frontline staff, your frontline leaders know how to recognize impairment. We do it all the time on the ambulance, so it really shouldn't be a heavy lift for our folks, but focusing on impairment, always having a second set of eyes on that person to make sure that what you may have subjectively seen with that individual, that somebody else can validate that. And then, document. Record keeping still number one. If in fact you're going through an interactive process with the ADA, in many states you're required to document that. It's just good practice as a rule of thumb. So these are the kind of things that we're going to tackle on these quick takes. Ben, do you have any other? I know we got another one that we're going to do on vaccinations. Any previews of what we've got coming in the future for some of these? I know that the workforce committee right now is tackling lots of stuff, right? We've done a whole bunch of stuff relative to compensation. Any other messages for our members as we continue the work that we've done for the last year?
No, just our goal is to be able to have quite a few of these, as it's questions that if I'm having them, I'm sure others are having them. So if our membership is having questions, there's a good opportunity that several others are asking. So send those questions to us. We'll either tackle them in this format, we'll reach out to you separately, but we'll make sure to kind of get you the answer. But this was one that's kind of fairly new for us and thought it'd be a great opportunity. Obviously, another big thing with workforce that kind of came up to us as the committee was begun, we thought we had challenges around recruitment retention. That was before COVID hit. And so that introduced a whole new level of challenges for the workforce committee. So I know we'll be talking about that as well, in the connection to both COVID with Family First Act, with immunizations, and talking a little bit about that as well. But please feel free to share any questions you might have, and we'll do some research on them, and then we'll address them.
That's perfect. Yeah. So send your questions into info@ambulance.org, or certainly you can reach out to Ben or I separately. Ben's over at Lakes Region EMS. And of course, I'm Scott Moore with Moore EMS Consulting. So with that, Ben, thank you very much. I appreciate this quick take. I don't know how quick it was, but we're trying.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.